Finland, a land of silent forests, mirrored lakes, and endless northern light. But behind that calm surface lies one of Europe's strangest biological riddles. Because the DNA of Finland doesn't point west toward Scandinavia or south toward Europe, it points east, thousands of kilometers into the frozen heart of Siberia. How did this happen? How did a small northern nation, isolated by forests and ice, end up carrying the genetic fingerprint of people who once roamed the tundra near the Arctic Circle of Asia? It's a story of survival, language, and mystery. A story that begins not in Helsinki or Turku, but far away, in ancient Siberia, where nomads hunted mammoths and herded reindeer long before Europe knew the meaning of civilization. Today, Finland looks like a quiet bridge between East and West, a mix of Nordic charm and Russian proximity. But look deeper, and you find a population unlike any other in Europe. Genetically, the Finns stand apart. They are a mosaic, part Ice Age hunter, part Indo-European farmer, and part Siberian wanderer. Yet somehow, those Siberian traces, barely 10% of their ancestry, shaped their entire identity. When you line up the DNA of Swedes, Norwegians, and Danes, you see the familiar pattern: early farmers from Anatolia, mixed with Indo-European herders from the steppe. But in Finland, something breaks the pattern. Their Y chromosomes tell a different tale. While most Europeans carry the Indo-European marker R1A or R1B, over 60% of Finnish men share a paternal lineage that traces not to Europe at all, but to Siberia. Haplogroup N1C. The maternal side tells another story. Nearly a quarter of Finnish mitochondrial DNA belongs to U5B1 and U5B2, lineages that go all the way back to Ice Age foragers who hunted reindeer on frozen plains over 10,000 years ago. That continuity from the Pleistocene to the present is almost unheard of anywhere else in Europe.
It's as if the Ice Age never really ended here. Not in genes, not in memory. Archaeology agrees. The soil beneath Finland's forests holds the remains of hunter-gatherers who never yielded to the agricultural wave that transformed the rest of Europe. While southern lands adopted crops and livestock, Finland clung to rivers, fish, and forests. And then, somewhere between 2000 and 1000 BC, something extraordinary happened. From the far reaches of Siberia came the Uralic-speaking peoples, carrying new technologies, a strange new tongue, and that crucial haplogroup N1C. Their numbers were small, but their influence was enormous. They didn't conquer Finland by war or sheer population. They conquered it with culture. Their language spread across the north, outlasting the Indo-European expansion and giving birth to Finnish, Estonian, and Hungarian, Europe's last surviving Siberian voices. Modern genetics, linguistics, and archaeology now weave their stories together. And what emerges is something scientists call the Uralic problem. The question of how a people with such modest Siberian ancestry came to reshape an entire region, genetically, linguistically, and culturally. In the next chapters, we'll travel through the Ice Age plains where it began, walk with the hunter-gatherers who refused to vanish, and watch as Siberian DNA crossed the Urals and merged into the genetic soul of Finland. But before we dive in, remember, every gene tells a story, and every story carries echoes of survival. Because in the north, survival is identity.
13,000 years ago, there was no Finland.
Only ice. A sheet of glacial ice, more than a kilometer thick, crushed everything beneath it. Mountains, forests, rivers, all buried under blue-white silence. Imagine 3 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of one another. That's how deep the ice once lay over this land. When the world warmed and the ice began to melt, the earth groaned as it released its frozen grip. Valleys opened, rivers carved through ancient stone, and the first tundra plants took root on the bare rock left behind. It was a raw, unforgiving wilderness, but to the hunters following herds of reindeer and elk northward, it was opportunity. These were the first people to set foot on Finnish soil. Descendants of Paleolithic foragers from Eastern Europe. They brought with them tools of flint and slate, skills honed over millennia of survival, and something invisible but powerful: the mitochondrial DNA haplogroups U5B1 and U5B2. Those letters and numbers might sound technical, but what they represent is profound. Direct maternal lines that stretch back to Europe's Ice Age. And here's the astonishing part. Around 1 in 4 Finns today still carry those exact same maternal lineages. That's not just ancestry, that's continuity across 10,000 years of change, war, and migration. Archaeologists found their traces in sites like Ristola near Lahti, flint tools, microliths, and bone weapons so precisely crafted they rival modern engineering in their design. These people weren't primitive, they were specialists, innovators in an environment where every mistake meant death. They hunted elk and reindeer, fished in newly thawed rivers, and built skin tents that could be packed up and carried across frozen lakes. In Western Europe, the descendants of Cro-Magnons were already experimenting with farming, domesticating animals, and shaping a settled life. But here in the north, farming was impossible. The winters were too long, the soil too poor, the sunlight too brief. To survive meant to adapt, not to transform the land, but to live with it. And so they did. Generation after generation, these hunter-gatherers endured, watching glaciers retreat, forests grow, and the first birch and pine creep northward. In the DNA of modern Finns, scientists can still see them. They are the ancient foragers, the backbone of the Finnish genome, the ones who chose endurance over expansion, mobility over settlement. But what's even stranger is how long this way of life lasted. While the rest of Europe was swept into a tidal wave of agriculture, the Neolithic Revolution, Finland resisted. For nearly 5,000 years after farming appeared elsewhere, the people of the north continued to hunt, fish, and gather, living from nature's rhythm rather than bending it to their will. Archaeologists call this next chapter the comb ceramic culture, named for the beautiful pottery marked with comb-like impressions that they left behind. But their culture wasn't built on grain or livestock. The pottery wasn't for storing crops, it was for boiling seal fat and fish oil. Residue analysis shows a diet almost entirely aquatic: salmon, pike, seals, rich in fat and protein, perfectly suited to the cold. These weren't stragglers clinging to an outdated way of life. They were masters of adaptation. And in their bones and in their DNA, another secret began to appear. A faint signal pointing eastward across the Urals into Siberia. Somewhere between 6,000 and 5,000 BC, gene flow from Siberia began to reach the Baltic forests. It was subtle, maybe just small family groups moving westward along frozen rivers, trading tools and furs, marrying into local tribes, but it left a permanent trace. In their genes, the first whispers of what would later define Finland appeared, the beginnings of Siberian ancestry.
Not enough to transform the people, but enough to plant a seed that would grow for millennia. While Europe turned to plows, Finland held to the bow. And in doing so, it preserved something almost no other place in Europe did: the original DNA of its Ice Age inhabitants, blended with the first threads of Siberia. That ancient decision, to endure the wild rather than tame it, became the foundation of Finnish identity itself. But isolation couldn't last forever, because one day, new voices would echo across the forests, strangers from the southern steppes carrying horses, wheels, and a language that would change Europe forever. And when they met the people of Finland, history took a very different turn.